Okay, so before we get started, uh, we'd like to give you an opportunity to share some things about yourself in the chat. If you could give us your name, what institution you work at, and also an innovator who inspires you. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Just do that while I'm talking through some of our logistics. You'll see this press pause icon 2 times throughout the presentation. Each time you'll be asked to respond to a similar question to the ones being asked in the recorded interviews. In sum, chat will be your way of engaging one another as well as participating in the conversation. So please feel free to share and chat at any time in the presentation, even during the played recordings. At the end of our live presentation, we will have a Q&A for probably about a couple of questions, 2 or 3, since there are over 280 folks that have registered. We're just going to have to limit it to that. So you can use that to put questions in the Q&A section following Rick's presentation. So without further ado, we'll go on to the next slide here. So your host is the Marketing and Management section of IFLA. We'd like to welcome you to our webinar exploring the management of innovation. My name is Stephen Woods. I'm a social science librarian at Penn State University Libraries, and I'm going to be your host for this webinar. So our title, Managing Innovation, No Innovator is an Island, plays on an important theme introduced by the 17th century Anglican poet John Donne in his poem, No Man is an Island. Repurposed for this webinar specifically around innovation, the idea simply states, library innovators need to recognize that people need each other and are better together than they are in isolation. The corollary is that the library community needs innovators because every individual is one piece of the greater whole. Now, I admit this is not a great title because it takes this much to explain what it means. However, I'll take full responsibility since I came up with the title under some time constraints. And I actually liked the title of Rick's presentation better, but my grandfather always said that I think too much. So there you go. So our conversation for this webinar will begin with a live presentation from Rick Anderson, a university librarian in the Western United States. You will hear 2 10-minute recorded interviews from colleagues in Sweden and South Africa. Our recorded conversation with each library manager addresses 4 questions. What are some examples of innovation in your organization? What is your approach to encouraging innovation in your organization? And what are the challenges in initiating an innovation? And why does innovation matter to the libraries? Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our guest speaker. The title of his talk is Innovation in the Library, Fostering It, Managing It, and Not Getting Carried Away by It. A better title, in my opinion. Rick Anderson is the university librarian at Brigham Young University. He has worked previously as a bibliographer for YBP, as head acquisition librarian for the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, as director of resource acquisitions at the University of Nevada, Reno, and as associate dean for collections and scholarly communications at the University of Utah. He serves on numerous editorial and advisory boards and is a regular contributor to the Scholarly Kitchen. He has served as president of NASIG and the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and is a recipient of the Horowitz Leadership in Library Acquisitions Award. Rick is the author of 3 books, including Scholarly Communication, What Everyone Needs to Know, published by Oxford University Press in 2018, This publication was also recently published in Japanese. So join me in welcoming Rick Anderson.
Hi, Rick, you're muted.
It's a rookie mistake. So hello, everyone. I'm honored to be able to address such a large and diverse group of my colleagues in the library world today. It's great to be with you. And I'm also excited to be able to talk to you on the topic of innovation. Now, that being said, you might find yourselves wondering why I was invited to give this talk, because as you're about to see, I'm kind of ambivalent about innovation in libraries, but I hope that I can share some thoughts that will be helpful as we all try to figure out new ways for our libraries to be effective. So let's go to slide 2, Stephen. You're going to hear me say this several times this morning because I think it's so important. And that is that there is nothing virtuous about innovation in itself. The fact that a practice or a program or a process is new or groundbreaking makes it neither good nor bad in itself. I think of innovation very much the same way I think of change. Change is another, what our British friends call a great and good word that we use to sort of imply virtue. But whenever someone asks me, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze, I'm sorry. Whenever someone asks me whether I believe in change or whether I want to work for change, my answer is always the same. I don't know. Tell me what it is you want to change and how you want to change it. I definitely want to work for change that makes things better, but I have no illusions that change always does that. Hitler certainly brought a lot of change to Germany. I'm personally not a big fan of Donald Trump. When he became president of the United States, he brought a lot of change. It wasn't necessarily good change. Well, the same thing goes for innovation. Innovation is good and it's important to the degree that it represents either something that is both new and needed, or that it represents the needed improvement of something old. Let me give you an example from my past. So some years ago, when I was working for a different university, our library occupied an old and very kind of rundown and ugly building on campus. And the university had decided it was time to just build an entirely new library. And I was part of the leadership team of the library at this university. And so I was involved for a long time with almost daily meetings with the architects who were working with us to come up with a new design for the new library. And it became clear very early on in this process that the architects were looking for an opportunity to create a building that would be very innovative, very forward-looking, very modern, and that would really show off their skill as architects. We were trying to create a building that would be very usable, very approachable, very human, very warm, and that would function well for our patrons. Now, those two goals are not mutually exclusive. You can have a very modern and very approachable and usable building, but there was some tension between the folks in the library and the architects as we had these conversations, because the architects kept bringing really cool ideas that we as librarians looked at and said, yeah, that would look really great, but it wouldn't necessarily be very helpful for our patrons. Now, we were able eventually to come to come to a consensus on what the library should look like. And this university built an absolutely beautiful and very usable, very friendly library. But I came away from that experience understanding for the first time that, you know, the desire to innovate is not always fully congruent with the desire to make things maximally useful. That being said, innovation is certainly a good thing when it's harnessed and channeled in the right way. And when it comes to libraries, we kind of face a particular challenge when it comes to innovation. And that is that libraries were not set up to be innovative. Libraries were set up to be solid and reliable and unchanging. In fact, a very big part of the value proposition of a library is that it's not going to innovate, but instead that it's going to keep on doing what it's always done. For centuries, that's what has been expected of us in libraries. And then in the 1990s, something very important and very disruptive happened, and that was the internet got a graphical interface, which we called the World Wide Web for a long time, and now we just call the internet. And the entire world of scholarly publishing began very quickly to move online. And now that our virtually our entire information world is online, now all of a sudden libraries are expected to be nimble and responsive and quick on our feet and innovative, and we're expected to come up with new ways of doing things. And this actually brings us a lot of opportunities, which is great. But in taking advantage of those opportunities, we often have to fight not just an entrenched political culture, an entrenched professional culture of doing things the same way in a reliable way, but also long-standing expectations from our host institutions, which are often confused about what they want the library to do. They might want the library to be nimble and responsive, but they also want the library to still have 1 million books and traditional research service points and all of the things that they've always expected us to do. So these are challenges that we have to juggle as we think about ways of being innovative in the library. I do think it's very important that we understand that the innovation that does bubble up in your library is not likely to come from the leadership. For those of us who are in leadership positions in libraries, what's key is the ability to spot and nurture innovative talent within the organization. For one reason, because an idea that might be resented and resisted if it comes from the top might be enthusiastically adopted if it comes from one of your colleagues. So those of us who are in leadership positions, in my view, should be thinking less about what can I do to innovate in the library and more about who is it in my library that is coming up with really creative ideas that I can help to nurture. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Another overarching principle that I'll also be talking about more in a couple of minutes is the idea of keeping innovation in its place. And I won't say any more about that for right now. Let's go to the next slide, Stephen. I don't know how many of you have heard of the concept of a skunk works. This is a group within an organization that is tasked with developing new and innovative ideas with little or no bureaucratic oversight. These groups are usually kind of defined within the organization and then sort of put in a little bit of an isolated space in the organization so that they can work without the normal oversight. The idea of a skunk works was developed in the Lockheed Martin Lockheed Martin is still a major producer of aircraft. And just at the beginning of World War II in 1939, the Lockheed Martin Corporation put together what they called a skunk works and tasked them with coming up with innovative airplane designs. The P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft was developed by Lockheed Martin Skunk Works group. And then a few years later, that group went on to develop the P-80 Shooting Star, which was the first American jet fighter. We don't think of jet fighter aircraft as a World War II phenomenon, but the first one was actually developed in 1943. And it was developed by this group that had been carved out from the rest of the company and set aside and told, just come up with crazy ideas and develop them and we won't interfere. Since that time, a lot of other businesses, especially engineering and tech firms, have made use of that same skunk works concept. Let me share with you another story from earlier in my career. So again, at another university where I was working, we had a dean, a library director, who was very interested in trying to come up with new and innovative things for the library to do. He recognized that he himself was not necessarily that kind of thinker. And so he looked around the library and tried to identify some people that he could put together into a skunk works group. Now, the mistake he made was that he chose me to lead that skunk works group. I was the wrong person to choose because while I am in fact willing to do new things and I'm willing to take risks and I'm always looking for opportunities to do things in new and more effective ways in the library, I myself am not a very creative thinker. I am not someone who's going to come up with crazy and innovative new ideas. And I think that he believed that I was a creative thinker because I was willing to do new things. And so we gathered a small group together, and the other people that I was working with were other people who were similarly willing to try new things, but none of us was really good at coming up with great ideas. And this skunk works group that our dean put together really didn't work very well. I came away from that experience really kind of feeling like I had failed. I looked, and at the time I didn't really understand why. I didn't understand why it hadn't worked. I didn't yet know myself well enough to understand what had gone wrong. I look back on it now and I can see the mistake that he had made. First of all, he had mistaken a willingness to do new things with actual creative thinking. They're not the same thing. But there was another mistake, and this was a mistake on the dean's part. He really liked crazy new ideas, but he wasn't always willing to enact change that would upset certain members of the staff and the faculty in the library. Even if he thought they were the right thing to do, there were some people that he was willing to upset and other people that he wasn't willing to upset. And even when we did come up with ideas, that made it hard for us to enact them. So the lesson that I took away from this experience was, if you want to foster innovation in the library, you've got to figure out who the real creative thinkers are in your organization. Now, ever since the 1960s, I feel like we've kind of been enthralled to the idea that everyone is creative, that you just have to give people space and give them permission and let them create. But it's not true. Creativity really is unevenly distributed in the population. And that's a good thing, because if all we had in the population were highly creative people, we would probably have a really hard time getting anything done. Somebody has to do the unexciting technical work. Somebody has to keep track of the money. Somebody has to manage processes. That work is just as important as coming up with cool ideas is. But what this does mean is that if you're a leader or a manager in a library, part of your work is to figure out who your creative thinkers are and then harness their creativity and protect them. You have to protect them because innovation is always threatening to someone inside the organization. It's often threatening to multiple people. So it's not enough as a leader or a manager to just say, hey, I want you to innovate, go out and innovate. You also need to be able to demonstrate that the people you are charging with being innovative can count on you to have their backs when their colleagues get mad at them for threatening their processes or their workflows or their job descriptions. One of the things that my staff here in my library are very tired, I think, of hearing me say is that workflows are not sacred. The outputs, the services that we provide, those we need to protect, but our workflows may need to change. And too often we invest too much in maintaining constant workflows. And that can get in the way, not only of innovation, but it can get in the way of providing good service. My last point about fostering innovation, obviously being willing to both encourage and foster and protect innovators does not mean that you are going to implement every innovative idea that comes across your desk. Clearly, you can't do that. You won't have enough resources, for one thing. And besides, not all innovative ideas are good. But what you can do is you can reward all innovative ideas. Now, you may not be able to reward them with cash money, but when somebody comes to you with a crazy idea, instead of saying, yeah, that's not going to work, you can say, wow, that is a really interesting idea, and I'm really glad that you brought it to me. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to implement that particular idea, but I like the way you're thinking, and I want you to keep thinking that way. And the next time you have what might be an innovative idea, please bring it to me again. As a manager or as a leader, the more open to that kind of conversation you can be, the more you're going to foster creative thinking in your organization. Not all rewards have to be concrete. If you can give concrete rewards, that's great. But we need to not underestimate how significant it can be to our staff when we take the time to listen to them and when we give them positive feedback about their sort of out-of-the-box thinking. That can make a huge difference, I've found. Okay, let's look at slide 4 now. This is the slide on managing innovation. Sometimes I hear people say that if you try to put any fences at all around innovation, you're defeating the purpose. You're saying that the only innovation that will be allowed in your organization is innovation that the administration approves of, and how can that lead to real significant change? My answer to that, of course, is that real and significant change is, like innovation, a value-neutral concept. Like I said before, real and significant change can be good and it can be bad, depending on what it is you're changing and how you're changing it. No reasonable person believes that literally any innovative idea should be pursued. We have to discriminate between ideas that we will pursue and those that we won't. And the principles that we use in making that determination need to be the same principles by which we make all other strategic decisions in the library. The library's goal should not be to achieve change, but to achieve radical improvement. So this does mean that you need to define boundaries, but you need to define those boundaries clearly and fairly and constructively. And the way that you do that is by being very clear what your library's mission is and what its strategic directions are. Those need to be embodied in statements that are clear and concise and that you talk about repeatedly in your organization. Your mission and your strategic directions form the boundaries within which you're going to try to implement innovative ideas. So when an innovative idea comes up, the first question you ask about it should be, does this seem to have the potential for moving us significantly forward in our strategic directions and increasing our ability to accomplish our mission? If the answer is yes, and if you have sufficient resources, then you implement the idea. And if 3 innovative ideas are brought to you at the same time and you only have the resources to try 2 of them, then the question is, which 2 of these ideas have the most potential to move us significantly forward in our strategic directions and increase our ability to accomplish our mission? Of course, when you're implementing innovative ideas, one of the questions that you have to establish right up front is, how long are we going to let this go on before we take a pause and evaluate it and see whether it's doing what we expected it to do or whether it's working at all? One of the worst mistakes you can make as a leader or a manager is to implement an innovative idea and then forget about it and let it sort of trail on without any evaluation. We're going to talk about walking away from sunk costs in just a minute. But anyway, what this approach does is not only create boundaries within which the organization is going to work when trying out innovative ideas, but it also creates context. It helps people see why the library is trying to be innovative. We're not trying to be innovative just for the purpose of innovating or of being seen by our peer institutions to be innovative. We're being innovative for the purpose of better serving the people that the library exists to serve. There's a man named Cliff Lynch, of whom many of you will have heard. In a presentation one time, I heard him say, kind of almost in passing, he was talking about collaboration. And he said, you know, the purpose of collaboration is not to collaborate. And I thought, what a great insight. So often we talk about collaboration as if it were an end in itself. But obviously, the reason that we collaborate is because we believe that collaboration is the best way to accomplish a particular goal. And the same thing is true of innovation. The purpose of innovation is not to innovate, nor is it to be looked up to as an innovative organization. The BYU library is not here for the purpose of being looked up to by other libraries. The BYU library is here for the purpose of helping BYU accomplish its mission. The image that I usually invoke is that I want our library to be like an engine on an airplane, constantly, where the airplane is our university. I want the library to be an engine that is pushing the university in the direction that it's trying to go. So the answer to the question, why do we innovate, here is so that we can better serve BYU's students and move BYU in the direction it's trying to go. All right, let's go to slide 5. Obviously, you know, managing innovation and not getting carried away with innovation are kind of synonymous concepts. But here I want to propose, sorry, I keep being about to sneeze and that's not coming. But here I want to propose 3 principles that I believe if we can internalize and apply them will be particularly helpful as we try to manage innovation most productively and most effectively in our libraries. The first one is the one that I just talked about. We just need to bear in mind that innovation is not a goal in itself. Innovation is a means to an end. And the second principle is the end, the purpose of innovation is to solve problems. And what that second principle leads us to is principle number 3, which may seem a little bit odd. But if we understand that the purpose of innovation is to solve problems rather than to be innovative, then that will help us think more rationally about the resources that we allocate to innovation. The sunk costs fallacy, for those who might not be familiar with it, it's kind of an economic concept. There are things that you do, projects that you begin, that require you to invest a lot of resources up front that you can't get back after you've invested them. The fact that you have invested those resources up front can lead you to be irrationally attached to the project and to keep throwing resources at it even when it's clear that it isn't working, because you've invested so much in it already and you don't want that investment to go to waste. Thinking in terms of, I don't want that sunk cost to go to waste, is not a rational way of thinking about allocating resources. When it's clear that that an idea or a process or a program, however innovative it was, is not working, if our job is to manage resources in the library, we need to be willing to stop sinking costs into it and go on and do something else. And I'm going to tell you one more story from my past, and then we'll go to the Q&A. But when I worked at the University of Utah, the institution I was at just before I came to BYU, this was in the late 2000s, 2007. And at around this time, a new machine was coming on the market called an espresso book machine. Some of you have probably heard of them or maybe even seen them in action. And an espresso book machine is a really, really cool contraption. What it basically is two printers, and between the printers is a machine that consists of a glue pot and a saw. And what this machine does is it hooks up to a database of ebooks. And when you say, I want this book, then the one printer prints up the text block of the book, and the other printer prints up the cover of the book on heavier paper. And then the machine grabs the text block and dips the spine of the text block into the glue and brings the cover and attaches it to the spine and folds it up and clamps it and hangs onto it while the glue dries for a few minutes. And then the saw trims the book to the right size, and then it spits the book out a slot, and bang, it's like a vending machine for books, where your options are literally millions of titles. You can pick any of those books and have one printed for you in the moment in about 5 minutes. It's an amazing machine. And I was really excited about it. I was over the collections in this library, and I thought, this is a new and exciting way for us to do collection development. Instead of us just buying books that we hope people will be interested in and will want to use, we can give people access to this huge database of many more books than we ever could have bought. And we can say to them, if you want one of these books, hit this button, we will print it up for you and check it out to you. And then when you bring it back, we'll add it to our collection, because we know that at least one person wanted it, which is more than we know about most of the books that we buy. Well, this machine, as innovative and as exciting and cool and fun as it was, completely failed to have the transformative effect on our collecting processes that I had hoped it would. It got pretty good use, but it wasn't mostly used for the production of academic books that we want to add to our collection. It was mostly used as a curiosity or for pleasure reading, or we had a book arts program in the library, and they would use it to do sort of experimental book things. And one of the main reasons that it didn't work very well is that the database that the machine connected to had millions of fantastic books, but it had terrible metadata, which made it very difficult for people to find books in that database. Without an easy way to determine what was there, nobody had any real incentive to produce a book. Well, we continued to have the EBM for probably 10 years. And finally, there came a point at which we had to decide, are we going to keep sinking resources into software upgrades and repairs and updated equipment for this thing? Or are we going to acknowledge that it hasn't done what we really hoped it would do and call our experiment finished? And because we had smart people in that library, that was what the administration decided to do. I am really glad that we tried out the EBM. We learned some really important things from it. And I'm really glad that we were smart enough to walk away from the costs that we had sunk into it when it was clear that innovation had not borne the fruit that we wanted it to. So that's it. Stephen, we can go to the last slide. It's basically just saying thank you. But I just want to thank you all again for inviting me to join you today and talk about these, to me, very interesting and very exciting concepts. And I look forward to discussing with you further in the Q&A.
Okay, so this is your opportunity to pop some questions into the Q&A section of the webinar, and my colleague Jeremiah will read just a couple of them due to the time.
I should also say that I've provided my email address here on the slide. Anybody who wants to shoot me an email and discuss any of these things further is absolutely welcome to do so anytime. Stephen, I think Jeremiah might be muted.
Jeremiah, are you muted?
I am muted, but it's because I don't have anything to say at this time. We haven't received any questions.
Okay, great.
Oh, wait, but all I have to do is say that. So we received one in the Q&A and also one in the chat. Alberta says, good morning, Rick. Walking away from sunk costs is really difficult. Any words of wisdom on how to help colleagues see this value?
Yeah, Alberta was my boss at the University of Utah at the time that we walked away from the EBM. And she's right. It's very difficult to convince people that the time has come to walk away from sunk costs. As far as words of wisdom, the only thing I can say is you have to be willing to listen. And you have to be willing to be patient with people as they work through their feelings of investment. And you have to be gentle when you're sort of explaining to them the irrationality of letting yourself remain attached to those sunk costs. Nobody likes being told that they're being irrational, right? And you can't put it in those terms. You have to you really have to listen. You really have to honor their feelings, and then you have to explain as best you can. You know, if there were a way to get these costs back and redirect them, we would do that, but there isn't. And because there isn't, that doesn't mean that it would make sense for us to keep throwing money at this thing that's not giving us what we need back. And so you know, we need your help in figuring out what things we should do going forward. I don't know if that's a great answer, but I think that's the best one I can come up with for helping people to walk away from sunk costs. It really is a genuinely difficult moment.
Thank you, Rick. And we also received a question from Hannah, who asks, as a middle manager, how do we advocate for innovation to our senior leadership?
That's a great question. And I think the answer kind of has two parts. One part is you need to make sure that you understand your leadership's orientation towards innovation. If your leaders are people who are excited about innovation as such, then when you pitch your ideas, you want to lean heavily on the fact that these ideas are innovative, that other people are not doing this. This kind of thing hasn't been done before. This is something that it would be exciting for us as a library to be the first to do. If they're more skeptical about innovation in itself, but are more interested in functional improvement, then you want to lean less heavily on the idea that this is an innovative, this would be an innovative solution, and lean more heavily on here are the ways in which this innovative idea would improve our programs and our processes and the service that we provide at our institution. When you're advocating for anything to leadership, it's really important that you understand what your leadership's orientation is and what your leadership's goals are, and make sure that you pitch your idea in a way that makes it clear how your idea will help the library do what the leadership is trying to get it to do.
Great. And this one is from Antoine, who says, innovation is often seen as the creation of new services. Can it sometimes be about giving up old or not useful enough anymore services?
It absolutely can. That's such a great comment, Antoine. Thank you. One of the things that I did in the past that was seen by many as innovative, bordering on insane, was at a university where I worked, we eliminated the journal check-in process. Now, if anybody works in the serials department, you're probably going, what? But this was a process that most serials librarians think is absolutely essential. But my boss at the time, who was the one who came up with the idea, it wasn't me. My boss at the time was convinced that the huge amount of work that we were investing in the journal check-in process was not matched by the benefit that we or our patrons got back from it. It was helping us to keep a particular kind of record very cleanly and accurately, but the cleanliness and accuracy of that record wasn't yielding an awful lot of benefit. At first, I thought he was nuts. I didn't think it made any sense, but as I thought about it, finally, as I thought about it over a period of months, I finally came to believe that he was right. And he was really excited that I was willing to try this out. I was in charge of the serials department at the time. And so we very carefully investigated what we might do to bypass this check-in process and what we might put in its place. We did it as a pilot. We did it for a period of time and then stopped and evaluated to see, what effects did this have for good or ill. And we ended up deciding to leave that eliminated process out of our workflow. I got a lot of speaking invitations when we did away with journal check-in. There were a lot of people around the profession who, like I said, thought we were crazy. But here's the very interesting thing. I would go and give talks at conferences about eliminating journal check-in, and people would come up to me after my talk and they would say, everything that you said makes sense to me. I think we need to do in our library the same thing you did in yours, but I don't think I'll be able to get my staff to go along with it. And I would come away from those presentations thinking, this is not a failure on the part of your staff. This is a failure of leadership. And the ability and willingness to take an idea that makes sense and to say to your staff, we are going to try this and I am going to help you through this transition and try to make this as painless for you as possible, but we're going to do it. That is a really, really important characteristic of a manager or a leader. And I was disappointed by the number of people who, one of my little sayings is there are too many people in our profession who are willing to take a leader's pay and are not willing to do a leader's work. That's part of a leader's work. But that's a long answer to the question. Can innovation sometimes involve the elimination of processes? It absolutely can. And sometimes that's more challenging for people to accept than bringing in a new process.
Thanks,
Great.
Rick. And Rick answered my question on if his sneeze would ever come. So thank you for answering that question, Rick.
Sorry, that was embarrassing.
All right, I'll turn it back to you, Stephen. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we're going to move on. If you could just take an opportunity in chat to share your appreciation with Rick for sharing his thoughts. We really appreciate you spending the time to talk with us, in my case this morning, in some cases this evening. So thank you, Rick.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. So what I want you to do is in chat, I want you to please take an opportunity to share a quick thought as I'm introducing our next speaker from Sweden. How is innovation encouraged in your organization? This is your opportunity to share your thoughts. So it's time to hear our recorded interviews with our colleagues in Sweden and South Africa. Unfortunately, in this format, it's not possible to do a Q&A with those being interviewed since they are pre-recorded. If you're watching the time, these are 10-minute videos, so we will definitely end way before the hour and a half that was scheduled. This is a picture of the Lund Public Library in Sweden with a picture of their newly purchased bookmobile. Want to give you an opportunity to respond to that question. How is innovation encouraged in your organization? Feel free to participate in chat as you're listening to Catharina.
Hello, my name is Catharina Isberg. I'm director of the Lund Public Library, and I've been there since October 1st. And before that, I was in Helsingborg for 9 years. So I will talk about innovation management from both of these organizations. I've been working for 32 years within the library business. And in Swedish, saying hello is hej.
Okay, well, thank you. What are some examples of innovation in your organization?
Well, I would like to share some pictures. Some examples of innovations in my organization. I want to have some example from Lund, where I'm working right now, and I will end with this, but I will also start with it. And you can all see me sitting here holding our LIASA or reduce. And I will tell you a little bit more about that afterwards. In Helsingborg, we were working a lot with innovation, and we wanted to be the innovative capital of Europe. We actually were the runner-up, the 5 runners-up for that competition. And all of the city was working with innovation for several years. And in June 2022, we had a huge city expo, Age 22, which was a welfare initiative for the future, which was all about innovation and reinventing our city governance. In Helsingborg, we had another example, which I find innovative, and it's actually a process. It was the planning of the new city library, and the new city library will be built and ready in 2026, so it's not there yet. But the process to get there has been a process of very much inclusion and really involving the citizens in the process. And also we did recruit a service designer to work with this process so that we got other competence into the library. And it was also part of the city's work with involvement. So that is one example of innovation. And I'm also sure that all of you have been working a lot with innovation during the pandemic crisis. And I chose one picture, which I find as a small innovation, but it was really important. And that was the support computer. With plexiglass, we could continue to give the customers support at the computer, but in a safe manner. And it took some time to get this up and running, but it was really a success. And it was also something that we kept after the pandemic. We had a lot of new services. We had a reading hub for the young people, because they were not supposed to be in the library, but we also saw that they have to have somewhere to sit calmly and read. So we tested making a reading hub. A lot of digitalization, and I'm sure that all of you recognize that we did improve our digital services a lot during the pandemic crisis. And we also had a much more agile work style. And for example, we had a Corona sprint workshop where our staff could come up with different solutions. And the reading hub was one of those solutions. But if we look at Lund, where I have been for the last 3 months, we do work with extended opening hours. And that means that you can use your library card to enter the library building when the staff is not there, when the library is closed. And we have had that since 2009, so quite a long time. But the staff wanted to do some more. How do you work with literacy and reading and inspiration during the times when there is no staff, but we have customers in the library? So they came up with this LIASA, or in English, you might want to say read use. And we have that in several different formats, and you saw it from the beginning. And the kids loves it. You can have it as a print out in paper, or this little thing you can sit and take care of in your lap, or you can also dress up as LIASA. A small innovation, but a very important one.
Thank you. So what is your approach to encouraging innovation in your organization?
Well, I actually think that the most important part is to have a culture of it is okay to make mistakes, and that you don't try to find who did that mistake. Instead, try to learn from them. And also, I think you have to have a culture of trial and error, so that you test things and then you do it, you look into, evaluate it, and you do it in another way and test it all over again, so that you really work more agile and in loops. And the last thing for me is, I don't have the answer. We need to do it together. No one has all of the answers. And as a manager, that is even more important, to really let go of the control and trust that your staff will come up with solutions and they will solve it together. And they will do it in another way than you would have done it. And that's great.
Great. So what are the challenges in initiating an innovation?
I would say that one of the challenges is to get all of the staff to embrace change. And also to find the time and the ownership. When you come up with an idea, go through with it from testing to implementing. And also to have the ability to actually realize that this is not anything we are going to move forward with, to kill your darlings. So know when you are going to kill your darlings and when you're going to implement them into ordinary business.
Right.
And then also to get communication about it. Communicate that it's okay to make mistakes, and that it's okay to trial and error. And I think that is really a challenge to get managers, politicians, library staff, as well as the library users and media, the journals, the journalists, that they accept the fact that we will make mistakes. We are really testing things out.
So my final question is, why does innovation matter to the library?
Well, first of all, we have a change of demography, and we need to reach new library users. And in order to do so, we do have to improve our services and make new services, which benefits them. And we also need to do more with less. We have less money and more people to serve. So we really need to make better use of our competencies and resources and collaborate with others. And the library is part of the development of the society. And we need to really strive that change that is needed. And then I also think that digital inclusion is one part of this, that we really, really need to work with it, and we need to do that in new ways. And if we succeed with this, I actually think that our surrounding world will get a better understanding of the library business and see actually what we can do and make use of our competences much better, so that we can continue to give access to information, literature, and knowledge, because that is really, really the key.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Hello.
Okay, so as promised, here is your second opportunity to share your thoughts in chat. And the question is, what are your challenges in initiating an innovation? Feel free again to respond to one another in this conversation as we move on to Cape Town, South Africa. So this is a picture of Cape Town, the city of Cape Town Library. A common theme, I think, that I saw in both of these interviews is the importance of understanding how to navigate city government and the ability to articulate how library innovation translates into citywide innovation initiatives. So without further ado, let's hear some thoughts from Nazeem Hardy.
Thank you for the opportunity. Goeienaand almal. My name is Nazeem Hardy. I work in the city of Cape Town in the Library and Information Services Department. I've been in the city of Cape Town since 2003. My current position is a senior professional officer. I actually hate that term, but that's my official title for acquisitions for the city's collection development unit. So basically technical services, but I work in the acquisitions section. In the almost 30 years that I've worked in the city of Cape Town, I have occupied many roles. I started out as an assistant librarian. I went on to be a librarian in charge. I then became a principal librarian, which was basically in charge of a number of libraries. And then I went on to what was probably my longest role that I've had in the city of Cape Town, which was actually marketing and research officer. Something that when I graduated, I would never have thought I would be, but that's what I did for almost 12 years. And from there on, I went back into the sort of traditional library world. I was the head for a number of libraries and then landed up where I currently am in acquisitions. So as is typical with library services across the world, my function is basically to look at the acquisition of library material. I manage the processes for the libraries to actually buy material, tracking the material, making sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed in terms of agreements, that vendors are adhering to the rules and the regulations, the libraries are, and basically making sure that we have stock in the libraries. So that's basically a summary of my career thus far.
Thank you. So what are some examples of innovation in your organization?
Okay, so I think typically, I think we tend to view ourselves as lagging in terms of things that we do in terms of innovation, if I look at what happens across the library world. But I think for us, very much innovation over the current number of years have been around processes, about actually trying to get into a space where we are recognized as an entity that is worthy of recognition. A couple of years ago, prior to 2005, probably was the darkest period for us. You know, we had lots of vacancies. We weren't a department all on its own, and library services were very much relegated to the back end of things. I think post 2005 has really been a drive to get libraries to be recognized for the things that they do. So very much putting us on the map in terms of saying, this is what libraries are, this is what libraries can do. Playing in the digital field, having a library service, and I think we basically have been the only one thus far from a public library service perspective where we've had alternative streams to traditional librarianship. So that's how I ended up, for example, in marketing. We have an ICT division which looks at ICT specifically in the libraries. We have an alternative stream, for example, in terms of programming, in seeing that libraries are actually at the forefront of programming innovation, of looking at things like introducing seminars, having the libraries actually perform on a platform where I think their skills are recognized. So a lot of our innovation, I think, has been in that kind of space. It's maybe not, you know, really the best in terms of innovation, but I think for us, very much it's been around putting libraries in a place where it is recognized that we contribute, that we have a vital role to play, and basically that I think what has been driving us, I think, over all this time. Recently, I think we have libraries individually who innovate in terms of presenting cloud services to their communities, and I think that's quite innovative for us. Sometimes we lag a bit, for example, in things like ebooks, etc. But eventually we get there, and I think I don't think I'm far off the mark when I say that in terms of a public library service in South Africa, I think Cape Town is still recognized as being one of the best services in the country, in terms of leading, in terms of innovating, in terms of setting the trend for other people.
Right. So what is your approach to encouraging innovation in your organization?
Oh, that's actually an interesting question, and I've really thought about it a little bit. If I look at my immediate situation where I am at, a lot of my approach to it has been to allow staff to think for themselves, to be themselves. For me, not to be the one that says, this is how we will do things, this is what we will do. Because I think that ultimately leads to innovation. When you allow staff the freedom to actually be able to think about something, to be able to express themselves in terms of what they see the situation is like, what the work processes are, what could be done differently. And I think that ultimately leads to innovation. In the broader organization I work for in the city of Cape Town, innovation is very much at the forefront of what the city is trying to drive. So in the last couple of years, it's done a lot in terms of encouraging staff to be part of innovation. They've even started a department that actually looks at innovation. So for me, it really is about allowing staff that freedom to say, this is my idea. Not to actually say something's right or wrong. And I think some of the greatest ideas comes from allowing people to express that kind of freedom, to feel that they have a contribution to make, and that whatever idea they put forward is actually worthy of considering. And I think that can always just lead to us innovating over time.
Wonderful. So what are the challenges in initiating an innovation?
I would say within the environment that I work in, I think a lot of it is around red tape. So I think municipalities are part of bureaucracy. It's what drives an organization like that. And I think very often that can lead to the stifling of innovation. So very often you can come up with the most brilliant idea and somebody will say, well, you've got to sign, about 10,000 pages, you've got to initial each page. What are the risks? What will stop us from being sued, or whatever the case may be? There's always that thing that says, our reputation, we're a municipality, the bureaucracy, and what stops us from being innovative. And I think that's probably the most frustrating thing. And sometimes it takes a number of years to actually bring to the fore the innovation that you thought about 5 years ago. But it's about chipping away at it and demonstrating that there's actually value in actually doing something in a particular way, or to do it differently. I think too much of our systems in librarianship is around, but we've always done things this way. And very much, I think the innovators out there is about, but why can't you just go a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right? But so much of our validation is based on, but we've always done things this way. Yeah, I think that's probably the most frustrating thing for me when it comes to initiating innovation.
So you kind of hinted at answering this question, the final question: what does, or why does innovation matter to the library?
I think it always matters. I think we're in the profession where we cannot afford to stagnate. We are living in a world where so much is against us in terms of bringing information to people. The world is really different in terms of the impacts on librarianship. It's rapidly changing all the time. We have jobs now that we didn't have a couple of years ago. And I think if we don't continue to innovate, if we don't see innovation as being important, then, we are going to be left behind. Nobody is going to take us seriously. And 99% of the time, we've got to fight for people to take us seriously. And so I think innovation has to be at the forefront of what we are striving to do. Because in order for us to continue being relevant, in order for us to continue presenting services to people that they want, where they are, etc., it will require us to think differently, to be able to do things differently. And in that way, innovation, I think, will continue being at the forefront of what needs to be important for us.
Thank you.
Okay, we're at the end of our presentation here. So in close, I wanted to make a number of acknowledgements that are imperative. I want to thank Rick, Catharina, and Nazeem, who were willing to share their thoughts with us. I think you heard a lot of the common themes throughout. We want to say also thank you to the mid-year planning committee that's listed on the slide, particularly Musley for the grand idea of focusing on the theme of the management of innovation, Alberta and Romeo for connecting us to speakers, and Jeremiah for his technical expertise and assistance. And finally, Megan Price, our IFLA coordinator. I want to thank you all as participants for your participation in the chat and the thoughts that you've shared there. I know that your colleagues appreciate being able to interact with you as well. So on behalf of the marketing and management section of IFLA, I want to thank you for participating in this webinar.